You then, and give us an update on what's been going on between Israel and Iran. Everybody knows that the bombing has apparently stopped in the last 24 hours, but where actually are we at the moment?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of confusion over the ceasefire, and there are many complexities to this conflict that I'm not going to be able to cover in their entirety today or on the news, but we can continue in extra. I think I'm going to highlight some of the most important failures in the narratives from the West, particularly from Trump and his administration. But first of all, the news came in this morning that Iranian parliament has voted to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. The bill prohibits entry of IAEA inspectors unless security of facilities is guaranteed. Of course, as the foreign minister in Iran did point out, the bombing of the nuclear facilities is effectively a violation of UN Resolution 487 that was established after the bombing of the Soureh alleged nuclear reactor in Iraq back in 1981, and is really a violation of the IAEA itself. 222 votes in favor, no votes against, and 1 abstention. So clearly, very, very sort of decisive vote. Now, if we have a look at what Donald Trump was saying, he basically claimed that the US strikes over the weekend have completely and totally obliterated Iran's 3 flagship nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. So let's have a look and see how correct that is. So this was in I-24, which of course is Israeli-linked media. Experts are questioning the extent of damage to the Iranian nuclear sites following the US strikes. And then on I-24 Hebrew TV, there was an interview with a specialist whose name I haven't been able to identify because it was all in Hebrew and on video, not on transcript. But he said the Iranian Fordow nuclear facility can only be destroyed from the inside. Let's stop with the illusions and fantasies. It can only be done from within or with hundreds of bombs dropped one after the other. So very interesting, totally countering Trump's claims at the weekend. And then this was interesting. This was published yesterday by Alistair Crook, of course, former MI6 with connections. He worked extensively in Israel itself, but he basically makes the point that the key nuclear allegation that started the war was coaxed from a Palantir counterintelligence algorithm. So let's have a look at what he points out in the article itself. Since 2015, the IAEA has relied on Palantir's Mosaic platform, a 50 million AI system that sifts through millions of data points, satellite imagery, social media, personnel logs to predict nuclear threats. He goes on to say that Mosaic is not a passive system. It's trained to infer from its algorithm hostile intent. When repurposed for nuclear oversight, its equations risk translating simple correlation into malicious intent. Now I just want to play, because what I've been noticing since Israel began the aggression against Iran, there have been a lot of Iranians going onto social media to make points and to stand in solidarity with their government, their army, and the Republican Guard. And this is just one of them. Very intelligent points being made here. We can just play.
آیا ایران به لبنان حمله کرده؟ نه، این اسرائیل بود. آیا ایران به سوریه حمله کرده؟ نه، این اسرائیل بود. آیا ایران غزه و کرانه باختری رو بمباران کرده؟ نه، این کار رو اسرائیل کرده. آیا ایران به یمن حمله کرده؟ نه، اسرائیل حمله کرده. آیا ایران به مصر حمله کرده؟ نه، اسرائیل حمله کرده. آیا ایران به عراق حمله کرده؟ نه، این اسرائیل بود. آیا ایران دانشمند ترور کرده یا به کشورهای دیگه مثل تونس یا سودان حمله کرده؟ نه، اما این کارا رو اسرائیل کرده. آیا ایران در اردن حمله هوایی انجام داده؟ خیر، ولی اسرائیل انجام داده. آیا ایران عملیات مخفیانه توی لیبی انجام داده؟ نه، اینم اسرائیل بود. و با همه اینا آیا ایران حق داشتن سلاح هسته‌ای رو داره؟ نه، دنیا میگه حق نداره. اما اسرائیل چی؟ اسرائیل بمب هسته‌ای داره؟ بله، چرا که نه، در خفا بدون هیچ نظارتی، با محافظت و سکوت.
I think very pertinent points made there. And I think one of the general consensus since the so-called ceasefire has been that Iran has largely been victorious in this war, both from a propaganda perspective or from a PR perspective, and from a military deterrence perspective. And this is from an Iranian professor who's a very well-known commentator on X in particular. So she's basically saying they haven't won or lost the war. She sees it only as a temporary pause. And she talks basically about how the war itself has demonstrated Iran's ability to defend itself and to develop its military infrastructure despite 40 years of sanctions. She also talks extensively, not only in this post, about the cohesion, the national cohesion across the population of Iran. And we've certainly seen demonstrations of millions of people out on the streets, including those that before might have been against some of the policies in Iran itself. And she goes on to say, and again, I've actually also highlighted this in some of the writing that I've done, we are now aware of our shortcomings more than ever and in dire need of some changes. So this is a realistic analysis of what the war has revealed to Iranians. Iran's biggest achievement or gift wasn't on the battlefield, but at home among the people, becoming as one. This is a very important point. The younger generations who had not experienced that during the revolution or the 8 Years' War, which is the Iran-Iraq war, now tasted something beyond themselves. It gave them the identity they were longing for. I know Iranians won't get how profound that is, non-Iranians, sorry. But the enemy understood this very well and planned accordingly. Our biggest challenges will be inside the borders from now on, but it's still hybrid warfare, and there are many open fronts, and I'll talk about that in my next section. But this is another video from a journalist at German channel ARD, Sophie von der Tann, speaking about the Israeli censorship on the Iranian strikes inside the occupied territories. So let's have a look at what she had to say.
Then there are restrictions, military censorship. And according to these rules, we are only allowed to film and report if civilian targets were hit, residential buildings, for example. But if military or strategic targets were hit, we are not allowed to film and report unless we get the approval of the censor. The military censor says that's because that's sensitive information that Iran is not supposed to get. But the problem is that that can create the impression that only civilian and no military targets are being aimed at and hit. And with regards to Gaza, the problem is that we've been barred by Israel from entering Gaza independently since October 7, 2023.
So extraordinary levels of censorship inside Israel, and it's now sort of going to probably slowly be revealed the number of intelligence personnel, military personnel that may have been hit in the multiple strikes across the occupied territory. It's also worth pointing out, she mentions that independent journalists can't go into Gaza. There is a recent Harvard study that has been published in the last couple of days that is now saying that more than 377,000 Palestinians are now unaccounted for inside Gaza. That's 17% of the population before the 7th of October, 2023. On the contrary, from Iran, we've seen very sort of detailed coverage of the deaths of both scientists, paramedics, and military personnel, particularly the command of the IRGC. If we can just have a look at this slide. This was in about 24 hours before the ceasefire came into effect. A martyred Iranian scientist, Dr. Sayed Mustafa Sadati Amakji, and his entire family were killed in an Israeli strike on Iran. So that was very shortly before the ceasefire. And there was a nuclear scientist, Mohammed Zubair, who was also killed in the period just before the ceasefire. Now, this is an interesting point. It comes from Wall Street Journal, but it's something that I've also been saying. Israel seeks to wrap up fighting with Iran soon. But my argument is that Israel is only going to accept a ceasefire, and the US is only going to accept a ceasefire because it's of advantage to them. And many analysts are basically saying that Israel was basically starting to run out of its interceptor missiles. Many of its air defense systems were seen to be failing on the videos that were coming out of Israel itself. And I would say it's worth saying that there may be a point, just as when Israel signed the ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon, they pivoted to Syria. So there is potential that we're going to see, for example, a pivot towards Lebanon, the potential for triggering Takfiri attacks on Lebanese soil to occupy Hezbollah before they restart the conflict with Iran. And finally, I just wanted to say this summarizes really the consensus on social media that really people have gone from believing in the negative propaganda against Iran into really considering Iran with a great deal of admiration, respect, and awe as a result of their ability to both deter Israel and to do serious damage to Israel.
Thank you very much for that, Vanessa. Lots to unpack in extra on that report.